Something about the Phoenix airport. Someone want to help me about this? What? Well, let's stop. All right, the Phoenix airport has now left us. The argument is that if you pass a bill that does sexual orientation only, you will be inviting sophisticated bigots to fire gay men or lesbians and say, oh, I didn't fire him because he was gay, I fired him because he was effeminate. I fired her because she was too masculine. That is theoretically possible. I want to be very clear, because I've asked people, it has never happened that we can see. There are a number of states that still have sexual orientation only. Other states have added transgender, but were for a period of time sexual orientation only. I've asked every legal group to give me the cases where that was sustained, because I think good lawyers would say no. There was a strong legal protection against what lawyers call pretextual things that are done as a pretext. And firing a lesbian and saying, oh, I didn't fire her because she was a lesbian, I fired her because she was too masculine, in a state where there's a law that says you can't fire people based on sexual orientation, it hasn't happened. It would be very hard for anybody to sustain that. Lambda Legal did give us one case where they said this happened. The case is Dawson against Bumble and Bumble. Bumble and Bumble was a hairdressing place. Why anybody thought that would be a good name to give for you to go get your hair cut, I don't know, but I'm not in that business. The court was very clear. In the first place, the basic suit was not brought under a sexual orientation discrimination statute. There was a New York statute, but that was not the primary suit. The primary was under Title VII of the Federal Civil Rights Act, which covers gender and not sexual orientation. And for most of that case, the argument goes the other way around. The judges say, look, she's trying to say that she was fired because she was a lesbian, and she's therefore trying to get that into the statute, but the statute doesn't say that. It says gender. In other words, people have said, oh, if you say sexual orientation and not gender, you'll be in trouble. This one was the reverse. They can hardly prove that opposite. But here's the most important point. The Federal Court of Appeals quoted the district court judge. I got copies of the case here. The person who fired the woman who brought the lawsuit claiming discrimination was herself, in the description of the court, this is their words, a transsexual in the process of transitioning from male to female. In other words, the holding in that case was she was fired because people thought she was a lousy hair cutter, not because of anything to do with her gender, her appearance, or anything else. With regard to sexual orientation, she said, well, she'd been fired and a couple of guys who worked there had called her a dyke. What the court said was, yes, these people may have said that. There's an argument. But they weren't charged of firing anybody. This is the holding. That these people insulted her, but they were not the ones who fired her. They never fired anybody. They didn't have any authority to do it. I mean, the case is overwhelmingly clear. It has, let me put it this way. If somebody tried to cite that case in the future as a justification for firing a lesbian because she was too masculine, even though it would have been illegal to fire her as a lesbian, any lawyer in the world could have got it thrown right out. It would simply not be a precedent. And there was nothing in there that opposed it. As I said, the case was decided on the grounds that she was fired for reasons that had nothing to do with either her sexual orientation or her appearance. So that's where we are. Now the question that we face is this, as a Congress. Do we kill the whole bill because we can't yet include transgender? I hope we will be able to get that. And as I said, I'm more encouraged now. We're not there yet. I think we may get there if this level of community involvement stays. But to have people say now, kill the whole bill, I think is wrong, as I said, because, again, it's not just for now. That's presumably, if we kill the bill now, we're accepting the view that we never pass a bill that protects millions of gay men and lesbians in states with no law from this kind of protection. You know, the woman from Cracker Barrel that we'd all heard about, the short order cook, and others. A woman who worked for the Attorney General of Georgia. Georgia doesn't have a law. It's not likely to get one. You deny protection of people who could have it. I think that's wrong. I think you make it much less likely that we go there again. And here's the thing that bothers me. I think there is a tendency in American politics for the people who feel most passionately about an issue, particularly when their focus is on a single issue, to be unrealistic in what a democratic political system can deliver. And that can be self-defeating. ENDA, dealing with sexual orientation, has been the primary legislative goal for most of the past few decades, eclipsed only temporarily by our need to defeat the marriage amendment. We are now in a position in the House of Representatives to pass a bill in America which bans discrimination based on sexual orientation. Maybe we get it in the Senate or not. I know they'll have a majority. Maybe they even get to 60. It has been the goal. People have supported it. People have criticized the Congress for not pushing it. If my colleagues now say, wait a minute, let me understand this. For decades, you've said this is your goal. We're now able to deliver it through a tough set of votes, because this will still be tough for a lot of people in tough districts. And now you're telling me you don't want it? Now you're telling me it's not good enough, what you've been asking for 30 years? Because, I mean, I do not think it is in the interest of the community of which I am a part to take the posture that we will want something until we can get it, and once we can get it, we won't want it anymore. We'll want something else unattainable. Moving the goalpost is good, but after you've scored the goal, maybe. You don't do that on yourself. You do it when you're on defense, not on offense. And this is the problem, that people are going to say, wait a minute, this is what you told us you want, and now you're stopping. It is simply, I think, not a good idea, but it's not just the gay and lesbian community. And I think this is an issue that plagues American politics. And let me say, in a number of cases, I'm generally in agreement with my friends who are taking these tough positions. I voted against the Iraq War from the beginning. I voted against the Patriot Act. I was the sponsor, and I testified in favor of transgender inclusion, and on at least 3 occasions, I went back and checked the record. 2004 and 2005, I spoke on the floor of the House in favor of transgender inclusion in the hate crimes bill. I testified in favor of it there. So I'm not talking now about substantive differences. I'm talking about an attitude that says, we want this, and we are indifferent to how to get it. We will demand that you give it to us, and if you don't give it to us, we'll punish our friends. And this is what's troubling me about this burst of activity now. Where was the lobbying for transgender inclusion when, in December, Nancy Pelosi announced we were going to do it, and we knew that we had this fight? It was only when the Democratic leadership said, you know what, we want to do this, but we don't have the votes, that people said, how dare you say that? Now, here's some of the characteristics of these very ideologically committed single-issue groups. First of all, I must tell you, I think there is a tendency to talk excessively to each other and not to understand the broader political reality. This is a country which includes Indiana and Nebraska and Kentucky and Oklahoma and a whole lot of other states, the mountain states, the southern states, North Carolina, South Carolina. There is a tendency for people not to understand how difficult some of these things are politically. Secondly, it is an article of faith among many of these groups that you should never accept that any elected official means well. Because any strategic difference, let me go even further, any difference in the perception of reality it's not to be treated as an intellectual difference, it's to be treated as a betrayal. It's to be treated as a failure of moral will. And these two come together. If you haven't talked to enough people in the country as a whole, you then do not understand the difficulty of doing something when people, let me be clear, I'm not worried about myself, right? The likelihood that somebody's going to run against me in my district on the grounds that I have been insufficiently pro-gay is not very high on my list of concerns. It seems to me, particularly if you know my district, that ain't going to happen. Pro-fish maybe, but pro-gay not at all. And people say, well, you're worried about being treated, in terms of people being happy with me, I can again tell you, I became chairman of the Financial Services Committee. This year, I have accumulated a lot of new friends without having to get any nicer. I get, a lot of people that are nice to me, and this is not personal to me. I worry, though, about its political effect. I worry about colleagues of mine from tough districts who have finally said, okay, I'm going to vote for this gay rights bill. It's not a gimme in America. And now they're going to be criticized when they come from tough districts, beat a Republican incumbent in a district carried by George Bush. I'm talking about, to win this, we need to get the votes of people who beat Republican incumbents last year in districts that voted for George Bush. And we're going to yell at them because they only vote to protect people against discrimination based on sexual orientation and not because they're not yet ready to vote to include transgender? And these are people who are with us if a marriage amendment came up again, and they'll be with us on gays in the military?